My name is Sorrel Lewis, and I'm 28 years old. 6 weeks ago, my father sold my grandmother's antique piano, a Steinway grand that she promised would be mine, and spent all $97,000 on a Mercedes for my older sister. They thought Grandma was too sick in hospice to find out. They thought I was too quiet to tell her. They were wrong. When I finally told her the truth, she didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She simply let out a long breath, picked up her phone, and set in motion a plan she'd been building for 5 years. But before I tell you what happened at my mother's 60th birthday party, the party that destroyed everything my family built on lies, let me take you back to where it all started. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-December. My last student, Emma, a 14-year-old with serious eyes and stubborn fingers, was struggling through Beethoven's Für Elise when my phone buzzed on the piano lid. I glanced at the screen. Dad. He never called. In 28 years, I could count the number of times my father had voluntarily dialed my number on one hand. Your grandmother had another heart attack. No greeting. No warmth, just information delivered like a quarterly report. She's stable, but they're moving her to hospice. Family meeting at Pennsylvania Hospital in 1 hour. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Emma had stopped playing. She was watching me with those careful eyes. "Miss Sorrel, are you okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Let's pick this up next week, okay? You're getting so close on that middle section." I apologized to her mother, gathered my things, and drove through Philadelphia's afternoon traffic with my stomach twisted into something I couldn't name. Not quite grief. Grandma was alive. Not quite fear. I'd been preparing for this. Something worse. The feeling of knowing that the one person who truly saw me was running out of time. I arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, damp from the rain, hair sticking to my forehead. My family was already clustered in the waiting room like a photograph from a magazine I didn't belong in. Dad stood near the window checking his phone, still in his tailored charcoal suit. Not a hair out of place. He looked like he was waiting for a business meeting, not visiting his dying mother. Mom perched on a chair with her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor, eyes scanning the room. Not with worry, but with the calculating gaze of someone assessing who was watching, who was judging. And my sister sat beside her, scrolling through Instagram with the bored expression of someone waiting at a dentist's office, dressed like she was heading to brunch rather than a hospital. I stood in the doorway in my worn cardigan and rain-dampened jeans, feeling exactly what I always felt around my family, like I'd wandered into someone else's life by accident. "Good, you're here." Dad didn't look up from his phone. We need to divide responsibilities. Not, "How are you?" Not, "This must be hard." Not even, "Sit down." Just logistics. Someone needs to visit Mother daily. Your mother and I have the business to run. We're closing the Harrison deal next month. Biggest opportunity we've had in years. And your sister's relationship with Blake is at a critical stage. His family is very particular about how things are handled. Blake Harrison, son of James Harrison, Dad's most important business partner. My sister had been dating him for 8 months, and my parents treated the relationship like a royal engagement. Every dinner choreographed, every outfit approved, every social media post curated. "So, Sorrel," Dad's gaze finally settled on me. "You'll handle the daily visits. Your schedule is flexible." The way he said flexible, you know that tone? The one that takes everything you've built and reduces it to a hobby? I taught 37 students a week. I woke up at 6 every morning, drove across the city, spent hours helping kids discover something beautiful inside themselves. But to my father, All of that was just empty space waiting to be filled with something useful. Of course, I said quietly. I want to be with her anyway. Perfect. He was already turning away, already done with me. Keep us updated if anything changes. I watched them head toward the elevator. Dad leading, Mom beside him, my sister trailing behind without looking back. Her hospice room smelled like lavender and old paper. She'd insisted on both. They try to make everything smell like antiseptic, she'd told the nurse on her first day. I refuse. If I'm going to die, I'll die surrounded by things I love. That was Grandma. 76 years old, sharp as cut glass, dying of congestive heart failure after her third heart attack. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe 2 months. She'd responded by requesting her favorite books be placed on the shelf, a lavender candle on the windowsill, and Chopin playing softly from a small speaker. The nurse, Beverly, a kind-eyed woman who'd worked hospice for 15 years, told me later that Grandma was the first patient who'd ever asked her to turn off the heart monitor because the beeping was ruining Chopin's rhythm. When I stepped through the door, she was watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. Her face lit up when she saw me. Not the polite brightness people perform, but something real, something that made me feel, for the first time that day, like I existed. There's my girl. Come here. She studied my face as I sat down. You look troubled and underfed. What happened? Nothing. Just logistics. I'll be visiting every day. And let me guess, your father made it sound like a chore he was assigning rather than a gift you were giving. I smiled despite everything. You know him well. I raised him. That's exactly why I know who he is. Her hand found mine, thinner than I remembered, the skin papery, but her grip was deliberate. And that's why we need to talk about the Steinway. My breath caught. The piano. The 1892 Steinway Model D Grand that had stood in the corner of her living room for as long as I could remember, where she'd placed my 5-year-old hands on the keys for the first time and whispered, "Listen, every key has a voice. Your job is to learn to hear them." Where I'd learned my first scales, my first sonata, my first heartbreak when I bombed a recital at 13 and hid under the piano, crying, until Grandma sat down on the floor beside me and said, "Failure isn't playing the wrong note. Failure is stopping the music." 4 generations of our family had played on that piano. My great-grandfather Friedrich had brought it from Germany when he emigrated. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a living thing. Warm ivory and resonant wood that held our family's entire history in its strings. That piano is yours, Sorrel. I told your father and your mother at Thanksgiving, in front of everyone. It belongs to you. I remembered. Thanksgiving dinner, 3 weeks earlier. Grandma making the announcement between the turkey and dessert. Dad's jaw tightening like a wire being pulled taut. Mom immediately changing the subject to holiday plans. My sister muttering under her breath, "Sentimental junk." Grandma, you don't have to. I want to. You're the only one who understands what it means. The only one who hears it the way I do. Promise me you'll take care of it. I promise. She smiled, but something else moved through her expression. Something deeper, harder to read. Like she was looking at a chessboard and seeing moves I couldn't imagine. "There are some things more valuable than money, child," she said softly. "And some people who need to learn that lesson the hard way." Then she added something that stayed with me long after I left that night. That piano has a longer history than anyone in this family knows. Your great-grandfather didn't carry it across the ocean just because he loved music. I wanted to ask more, but her eyes were already closing. The morphine was pulling her under, and I let her go, tucking the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I sat with her for another hour, listening to Chopin and rain and the steady rhythm of her breathing, wondering what she meant. A long silence. "I'm sorry, Sorrel." "You have nothing to be sorry for." "I do. I've watched how they treat you for years, and I kept hoping things would get better on their own. That your father would wake up. That your mother would see you. That was my greatest mistake, believing that silence could fix what only truth could heal. In 2 weeks, no one else visited. Dad sent one text message. Is Mom okay? Update if anything changes. Mom sent flowers, expensive ones, lilies and roses in a crystal vase, but never came herself. My sister didn't reach out at all. Beverly, the nurse, said to me one evening as I was leaving, "You're the only one who comes every day. I've been doing this for 15 years. Trust me, that's not normal. That's extraordinary." I didn't feel extraordinary. I just felt like the only one who remembered that a woman was dying. I let myself in, shook rain from my jacket, and walked toward the living room. The living room where the piano had stood for 30 years. I stepped through the doorway, reached for the light switch, blinked against the sudden brightness, and stopped breathing. The corner was empty. Not empty like furniture temporarily moved for cleaning. Not empty like something shifted to another room. Empty like something had been violently extracted from a space it had occupied for 3 decades. A rectangular indent pressed deep into the carpet, still holding the ghost of the piano's weight. A lighter patch of wallpaper marked where sunlight hadn't faded the paint behind the massive frame. Faint scratches on the hardwood floor traced the path where the legs had been dragged. The Steinway was gone. My legs went weak. I grabbed the doorframe and held on, staring at the absence. Pianos don't just disappear. 9-foot concert grands don't vanish in the night. Someone had come into this house, hired movers, and taken it. Deliberately. While Grandma lay in hospice counting her remaining days. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called Mom. "Sorrel, I'm in the middle of... Where is Grandma's piano?" A pause, the kind of pause that contains entire conversations. "Your father handled it. Adult business." What does that mean? Where is it? Don't worry about it. We don't have time for your drama. Mom, please. Click. I tried Dad. Voicemail. His recorded greeting, smooth, professional, the voice of a man who never doubted himself, felt like mockery. I texted my sister. "Do you know what happened to Grandma's piano?" 10 minutes later, one message. "Not my problem." An emoji. She answered the theft of our grandmother's most precious possession with a shrug emoji. I stared at my phone until the screen went dark. Then I drove to my parents' house on autopilot. The house, Grandma's house, I suddenly realized, where my parents had lived since Grandpa died 12 years ago, was lit up like a showroom, warm golden light spilling from every window. I rang the doorbell. When no one answered fast enough, I pounded. Dad opened the door with a scotch in hand. "Sorrel, what's..." "The piano. What did you do?" His expression didn't change. Not guilt, not shame. Mild inconvenience, like I'd interrupted a good TV show. "Sold it. Klein's Antique Instruments gave us $97,000. Excellent price for an instrument that old." The word "sold" hit like a physical blow. My vision narrowed. "You sold Grandma's piano? Without asking her?" And here's where I expected him to look ashamed, to stammer, to at least pretend he felt something. Instead, he took a sip of scotch and said, "Mother is in hospice, Sorrel. She's not in a condition to make decisions about assets. The company's been struggling. I won't lie to you about that. The Harrison deal is our lifeline, and we need every advantage." That piano was sitting in a room collecting dust. I converted a depreciating asset into something useful. He said it like a quarterly earnings report. Like he was explaining a smart business decision, not the betrayal of a dying woman. Behind him, keys jingled. My sister appeared in the hallway, grinning, dangling a keychain with a silver Mercedes emblem. "Check it out! Brand new C-Class. Blake is going to lose his mind when he sees it." The world tilted. "You bought her a car? With Grandma's piano money? It's an investment. Mom materialized from the kitchen with her own drink. The Harrisons are particular about appearances. Blake's family needs to see that our daughter comes from quality. This car sends a message. That piano is supposed to be mine. And what would you do with it? Mom's voice sharpened to a blade. Cram it into your one-bedroom apartment in South Philly? Be realistic, Sorrel. You don't have the space. You don't have the career. You don't have the life. Your sister needed this for her future. A real future. My sister jingled the keys again, but something flickered across her face. She avoided my eyes, shook the keys a little too quickly, smiled a little too wide. That wasn't confidence. That was performance. She knew. Somewhere beneath the Mercedes and the Harrison boyfriend and the designer clothes, she knew this was wrong. But admitting it would mean admitting that everything her life was built on, the special treatment, the conditional love, the being chosen, was a lie. So she performed. And the performance was almost worse than cruelty, because it was a choice she made in real time, right in front of me. Don't be jealous, Sorrel. Maybe if you'd picked a better career, you could afford nice things too. I looked at them. My father with his scotch and his justifications. My mother with her calculations. My sister with her trophy keys and her hollow smile. The family I'd spent 28 years trying to belong to. Does Grandma know? Silence. Immediate and heavy, like the air before a storm. Does she know you sold her piano without asking? Dad set down his glass. Mom stepped forward, her voice dropping to something cold and surgical. Your grandmother is on morphine half the time. She doesn't need to know anything that might upset her. She's fragile. Her heart is failing. If you tell her, if you cause her stress, if she has another heart attack because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, that will be on you, Sorrel. Do you understand? Do you want to be responsible for killing your grandmother? The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. I saw Dad flinch, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes, a flicker of discomfort. He didn't like the way Mom said it, but he didn't stop her. He never stopped her. He just let her say the things he was too careful to say himself, and then benefited from the silence that followed. This was where old Sorrel would have backed down, apologized, made herself smaller, accepted the guilt and carried it home and added it to the pile. But I kept hearing Grandma's voice from that first night in hospice. Some people need to learn that lesson the hard way. Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. I won't lie to her. I turned and walked out before they could respond. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my second-hand couch in my one-bedroom apartment, staring at a framed photograph on the wall. Grandma at her final concert. 20 years ago, fingers poised above those keys, her face luminous with something that went beyond happiness. Purpose. Belonging. A woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly where she was meant to be. Mom's words circled like vultures. If something happens, that will be on you. Was she right? Would telling Grandma be trading truth for her health? Maybe her life? I imagined the worst. Grandma's face crumbling, her heart seizing, monitors screaming, nurses running, and me standing there, knowing I'd pulled the trigger. But then I thought of something worse. Grandma dying peacefully, never knowing her own son had stolen from her. Never knowing the piano she'd promised me. The piano that held 4 generations of our family's music had been sold for a car that would depreciate the moment it left the lot, dying in a lie that everyone else was comfortable with. And I thought about 28 years of staying quiet, of accepting less, of shrinking myself into the smallest possible space so that my family wouldn't be inconvenienced by my existence, of hearing, At least she's useful for something, and walking away in silence, as if I deserved it. At midnight, I remembered something Grandma told me when I was 12. I'd failed a math test and didn't want to admit it. I tried to hide the paper, forge my mother's signature, anything to avoid the truth. Grandma found out and sat me down at the piano bench. Truth can wound, Sorrel, but lies always wound deeper. They just take longer. At 2 a.m., I thought about a third possibility, the one that scared me most. What if telling Grandma did nothing? What if she was too weak to react, too close to the end to fight? Then all I'd be doing was adding pain to a woman who already had enough, without changing a single thing. But by 3 a.m., I knew. If I stayed silent, I wasn't keeping peace. I was becoming complicit. I was joining my father and mother and sister in the lie, becoming another person who decided that Grandma's feelings didn't matter because she was dying anyway. Grandma deserved the truth. She deserved to know her son had stolen from her, lied to everyone about it, and assumed she was too weak to matter. And maybe, I deserved to stop apologizing for existing. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I would tell her everything before my first lesson. Whatever happened next, whatever it cost me, at least I would have finally chosen truth over comfort. At least I would have finally chosen myself. She was awake when I arrived at 6:30 a.m., propped against her pillows, watching the sunrise paint the room in shades of gold and amber. The lavender candle had burned low overnight, leaving just a ghost of scent in the air. Chopin was silent. The only sound was the steady, patient rhythm of the heart monitor she pretended to hate. "You look like you haven't slept," she said softly. I pulled the chair close to her bed and took her hand. Her fingers were thinner than last week. I could feel every bone, every tendon. But they closed around mine with intention, with presence. "I haven't. Grandma, I have to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." Her gray eyes, the color of the Atlantic in winter, studied my face. She didn't flinch. She didn't brace. She simply looked at me the way she always had, like I was the only person in the room who mattered. "Then tell me." So I did. I told her about the empty corner, the rectangular indent in the carpet where the Steinway had stood for 30 years, the lighter patch on the wall where sunlight hadn't reached. I told her about the $97,000 and how Klein's Antique Instruments had written the check. I told her about the silver Mercedes gleaming in my sister's driveway, the red bow on the hood, the keys jangling like wind chimes in her manicured hands. I told her what Dad said. She's not in a condition to make decisions about assets. And what Mom said. If she has another heart attack, that will be on you. I told her everything. Every word, every silence, every shrug emoji. And I braced myself for the thing I feared most. Grief so sharp it might stop her heart. Instead, she let out a long, slow breath. Not a gasp. Not a cry. A sigh, deep and ancient and unsurprised. The sigh of someone who had been watching a crack spread across a ceiling for years, waiting for the day it finally gave way. "Grandma?" She turned to look at me, and her expression wasn't grief-stricken. It was calm, steady, almost resigned, the way a doctor looks when a test confirms what they already suspected. "I knew this might happen, sweetheart." "You knew?" "I know my son. I've watched him become this person for 30 years. Watched generosity curdle into entitlement. Watched ambition swallow everything soft inside him. I hoped he'd change. I prayed for it. But I also prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't. My mind raced, tripping over itself. Prepared how? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she told me a story. 5 years ago, I went to the house, my house, unannounced. Your mother was hosting a charity gala in the living room. 40 guests, champagne, catered hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet playing in the corner near my piano. She paused, and something dark crossed her face. A woman complimented the house. "What a beautiful home, Maribel." And your mother smiled and said, "Thank you. We love this house so much." We. Silence. That's when I understood. They weren't just living in my house. They had absorbed it. In their minds, it had already become theirs. The house, the furniture, the reputation, everything I'd built with your grandfather. They'd taken it the way ivy takes a wall. Slowly, completely, until you can't tell where the stone ends and the vine begins. What did you do? I called Theodore Whitmore. She reached for her phone on the bedside table. "Hand me that, would you?" I passed it to her, confused. She scrolled through her contacts with surprising steadiness. For a woman on morphine and heart medication, her fingers moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She found a name, pressed call, put it on speaker. 3 rings. Then a voice, warm, professional. The kind of voice that belongs to someone who has spent decades handling other people's worst days with grace. "Doreen, how are you feeling?" "I'm dying, Theodore, but I'm clear-headed. It's time." A pause. Not surprise. Recognition. Like 2 old musicians hitting a cue they'd practiced 1,000 times. "I understand." "When?" "Sunday after next. Maribel's 60th birthday party. At the house." "I'll prepare everything. But Doreen, are you sure? There are gentler ways to." "Gentle is what I've tried for 30 years, Theodore. It didn't work." "Understood. I'll have the documents ready." "Thank you, old friend." She ended the call and looked at me with a small, knowing smile. The smile of a woman who had been playing a very long game and was finally approaching the end game. "Grandma." I stared at her. "Who is Theodore?" "Theodore Whitmore. He's a real estate attorney and estate manager. He worked with your grandfather at the same firm before your grandfather passed. After Richard died, I asked Theodore to help manage our family's assets." She settled deeper into her pillows. 5 years ago, when I saw what was happening, I asked him to do something more. I asked him to build a fortress, quietly, legally, so that when the day came, and I always knew it would come, there would be something left for you. For me? For you. Her eyes held mine. "Because I know exactly what would happen after I die, Sorrel. Your father would take the house. Your mother would take the furniture, the art, the silver. Your sister would take whatever was left. And you would stand aside and let them. Because that's what you've been taught to do. Because in this family, you've been trained to believe that taking up space is a sin." Tears burned behind my eyes. "I should have acted sooner. I watched how they treated you for years and I kept hoping, kept telling myself that your father would wake up, that your mother would see what I see, that your sister would grow out of it. That was my greatest failure. Not the silence itself, but the hope that justified it." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. "I need you to do one thing for me. Anything." "Tananayang. Timanaya Seni. Come to the party on Sunday. Dress in something that makes you feel strong. And bring your patience. The kind I taught you when you were learning Chopin and wanted to throw the sheet music across the room." Despite everything, I almost laughed. "That bad?" "Necessary." Her expression softened. "Your father and mother need to learn that actions have consequences. And I've spent 5 years making sure that when the lesson came, it would be unforgettable. I'm not doing this for revenge," she added quietly. "Revenge is empty. I'm doing this because it's right. Because you deserve to be protected, especially after I'm gone. Grandma." I don't have much time left. The doctors say weeks, but I think it's less. I can feel it, like a tide going out. So I need to know. She squeezed my hand. Do you trust me? Always. Then come Sunday. And remember, you are not the villain in this story. You never were. Theodore Whitmore's office occupied the second floor of a narrow brownstone near Rittenhouse Square. I went on Wednesday after my last lesson, still processing everything, still half convinced I'd imagined the whole conversation. The office was small and immaculate, old leather chairs, built-in bookshelves lined with legal volumes, the smell of coffee and wood polish. A framed photograph on his desk showed two young men in suits, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing. I recognized one of them, Grandpa Richard, 30 years younger, full of life. Theodore was in his early 60s, silver-haired, with kind eyes that had clearly seen every flavor of human behavior and chosen compassion anyway. He shook my hand warmly. Sorrel Lewis, your grandmother speaks of you constantly. She says you have her ear for music and your grandfather's stubbornness. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. He gestured to a chair. She asked me to walk you through a few things before Sunday, so you understand what's happening and why. I sat, hands trembling slightly against my knees. Your grandmother is one of the most remarkable people I've ever known, he began. She's also far more strategic than her children have ever given her credit for. 5 years ago, she came to this office with a list of concerns. Not suspicions, not accusations, but patterns she'd observed. Loans your father took from her that were never repaid. Increasing financial demands from your mother. Your sister's growing sense of entitlement. And something that worried her more than the money. What? You. He said it gently. The way you were being erased. She told me. Sorrel won't fight for herself. She'll step aside and let them take everything, because that's what they've taught her to do. I need to make sure that when I'm gone, there's something they can't touch. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. Theodore pulled a folder from his desk. So we built protections, layer by layer, over 5 years. Let me show you what we have. He slid a document across the desk. First, the property deed for the house on Chestnut Hill. I looked down. Clear as day, in official county records. Doreen Catherine Lewis. Your grandmother allowed your father and mother to live there rent-free after your grandfather's death. But she never transferred ownership. Not legally. Not through any document, verbal agreement, or implied contract. The deed has remained in her name for the entire 12 years. I stared at the document. They've been living in her house for 12 years, thinking it's theirs? Precisely. And under Pennsylvania law, they're tenants at will, which means the property owner can terminate that arrangement with proper written notice. But why would Grandma let them believe? Because she was watching. His voice was gentle but unflinching. Watching to see if her son would prove her fears wrong. Unfortunately, he proved them right. Repeatedly. He opened another folder. Financial records. Property tax receipts. All paid from your grandmother's personal accounts. Utility bills. Same. Maintenance, insurance, emergency repairs. Everything. Over 12 years, she's covered approximately $340,000 in expenses for a house your parents believe they own. My head was spinning, but Theodore wasn't finished. I also have documentation showing that your father has represented the house as his own property in business dealings. He's hosted James Harrison for dinner there at least 8 times. In business emails and presentations, he refers to our home in Chestnut Hill to establish credibility. Your mother has hosted charity events there, accepting praise for their beautiful home. Under Pennsylvania law, representing someone else's property as your own, particularly in commercial contexts, constitutes fraud. He let that word sit in the air for a moment. Now, the piano.
Him?
He pulled out a third folder. The 1892 Steinway Model D was sold to Klein's Antique Instruments 3 weeks ago for $97,000, without the owner's knowledge or consent. In legal terms, that's conversion of property, both a civil and criminal matter. But here's what's important. He leaned forward. Klein's paid $97,000 because your father sold in a hurry. He needed cash fast. His business is in serious financial trouble, something he's been hiding from everyone. Klein's recognized desperation and offered roughly a third of the piano's actual market value. A third? A Steinway Model D from 1892 in good condition, with documented provenance, is worth between $280,000 and $350,000 at fair market value. Your father was exploited by the buyer, yes, but he created that vulnerability by selling property that wasn't his, without authorization, under financial pressure. I sat in that leather chair and felt the room tilt. Everything I thought I knew about my family's financial stability, Dad's tailored suits, Mom's designer purses, the Harrison deal, the appearance of wealth, was scaffolding over an empty building. "There's one more thing," Theodore said. He slid a final document across the desk. 5 years ago, your grandmother established a trust, completely independent from her standard will. This trust was created specifically to protect her most valuable assets in the event of financial misconduct by family members. He paused. The sole beneficiary of this trust is you, Sorrel. The house, her savings, everything she could legally protect. It's yours. I couldn't speak. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, holding a piece of paper that contained more love than my parents had shown me in 28 years. "She wanted me to tell you one more thing," Theodore said softly. She said, "Tell Sorrel that the piano was the last test. If her father respected my wishes about one thing, just one, I would have known I was wrong about him. But he couldn't even do that." The night before the party, Grandma called. Her voice was weaker than ever. Each word cost her breath she couldn't spare, but her mind was ablade. "Sorrel, are you ready for tomorrow?" "I think so." "Grandma, are you sure about this? It's Mom's birthday, in front of all those people." "That's precisely why it needs to be tomorrow. Your father sold my piano like the decision was his to make. He announced it at dinner last month like I was already dead and buried. He assumed I was too weak and you were too quiet to matter." A ragged breath. "Witnesses matter, child. Your father has spent his whole life controlling the story. Tomorrow, the story tells itself." I gripped the phone. "I'm not doing this for revenge, right?" "No, sweetheart, you're not. You're doing this because a woman who is dying deserves to have her wishes honored, and a woman who is living deserves to stop being invisible." Silence. "Wear something that makes you feel like yourself, not like who they want you to be." "I will." "And Sorrel?" "Yes? After tomorrow, things will break. Relationships, assumptions, the whole architecture your family built on sand. Some of those things needed to break, but some of them will hurt." Her voice cracked. The first time I'd ever heard it do that. "I'm sorry I couldn't find a way that didn't involve pain." "You spent 5 years trying, Grandma. If there was another way, you would have found it." "I love you. More than music. More than anything." "I love you too." I hung up and sat on my bed, holding the phone against my chest, listening to the silence of my apartment, and understanding for the first time that tomorrow would change everything. Not just for my parents, but for me. There was no going back from this. No pretending. No more invisible girl in the corner. Tomorrow, I would either find my voice or lose my family. Maybe both. Ciao. Sunday arrived with pale winter sunlight, and air so cold it hurt to breathe. I chose the navy dress and the pearl earrings Grandma gave me for my 21st birthday. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, and for the first time saw someone who wasn't trying to disappear. Not armor, exactly. More like a declaration. I am here. I have always been here. And today, you will see me. The house looked almost festive from the outside. Someone had hung a Happy 60th Birthday banner across the porch in gold and white. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street. 35 guests, Grandma had said. Enough for an audience. I parked at the far end of the block and sat in my car for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Then I walked in. The house buzzed with the particular energy of people performing happiness. Too loud laughter, aggressive compliments, the clink of expensive glasses. Extended family I only saw at holidays. Neighbors from the old days who still remembered Grandma's garden parties. Dad's business associates in their weekend blazers. And near the fireplace, James Harrison himself. Tall, silver-templed, radiating the quiet authority of generational wealth. With his son Blake beside him and my sister on Blake's arm, smiling her practiced smile. My eyes went immediately to the living room. A large potted ficus sat in the corner where the Steinway had lived for 30 years. It looked absurd. A leafy apology for something that could never be apologized away. I wondered if anyone else noticed. I wondered if anyone else cared. Mom held court near the dining table in a red designer dress, accepting birthday compliments like a queen receiving tribute. Dad worked the room with practiced charm, shaking hands, patting backs, performing the role of successful patriarch with the ease of long practice. Aunt Vivian appeared beside me, smelling of lavender perfume, the same brand Grandma used. "Sorrel, sweetheart. How is Dory, really?" "Tired, but still sharp." She always was the sharpest one in any room. Her eyes drifted to the empty corner, to the ficus tree standing where music used to live. "I noticed the piano's gone. Your father told me Doreen wanted to sell it." Before I could respond, Dad's voice cut through the crowd like a conductor's baton. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please." He stood in the center of the living room, crystal glass raised, commanding the space with the total confidence of a man who believed he owned everything in it, which I now knew he didn't. Today we celebrate 60 wonderful years of Maribel Thompson Lewis. Applause. Mom beamed. But I also want to share some exciting family news. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming, and knowing didn't make it easier. As many of you know, our daughter has been seeing Blake Harrison, son of my dear friend and partner James. He gestured toward Blake, who smiled the polished smile of someone trained from birth to be agreeable. And to celebrate her bright future, we have a special surprise. He led everyone outside to the driveway where the silver Mercedes sat gleaming in the winter sun, a red bow on the hood like a ribbon on a bomb. "A gift," Dad announced proudly, his voice carrying across the yard. "Made possible by my mother's generosity. She chose to sell her antique piano to invest in her granddaughter's future." My sister squealed, threw her arms around Dad, posed for photos beside the car with the practiced angles of someone who'd been performing for cameras her whole life. Mom dabbed at fake tears. Dad basked in the applause of 35 people who had no idea they were clapping for a lie. I stood frozen on the porch. He was doing it again, rewriting the story, casting himself as the generous patriarch, turning theft into a gift and silence into consent. A woman I didn't recognize leaned toward her husband. "Wasn't that piano supposed to go to the other granddaughter? The music teacher?" Guess plans changed. Aunt Vivian appeared beside me, face pale, jaw tight. "Sorrel, did Doreen actually agree to this?" Before I could answer, my sister spotted me from beside the Mercedes and called out, voice dripping with sugar that couldn't quite mask the vinegar underneath. "Sorrel, come take a picture with us. Don't be jealous. I'm sure Grandma will leave you something too. Maybe her old sheet music." Scattered laughter from the crowd. Polite, uncomfortable laughter. The kind people produce when they know something is cruel but don't want to make a scene. My hands shook. My vision blurred. And for one terrible moment, I almost turned around and left. Almost retreated into the old pattern. Silence, acceptance, disappearance. Almost became invisible one more time. But then I heard Grandma's voice in my head, clear as a bell. You are not the villain in this story. You never were. And behind me, I heard the doorbell ring. Everyone filed back inside, cheeks flushed from the cold, still buzzing about the car. But Aunt Vivian moved through the crowd with purpose, positioning herself directly in Dad's path. Callan. Her voice was steady as stone. I need to ask you something. Dad's smile didn't waver. Can it wait, Viv? We're celebrating. Did you ask Doreen before you sold that piano? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward through the room. Nearby, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Mother is in hospice, Dad said, his charm shifting seamlessly into patience. The kind of patience powerful people perform when they want to make someone else look unreasonable. She's not in a condition to make these decisions. We did what was best for her. I spoke with her this morning. Vivian's voice grew stronger, drawing more listeners. She's completely lucid. And she told me you never asked her permission. You never even told her. More people turned now. James Harrison frowned, not with sympathy, but with the sharp attention of a man whose instinct for risk was finely calibrated. Blake shifted his weight, his hand loosening slightly from my sister's waist. Mom pushed forward, face flushed beneath her birthday makeup. Vivian, this is my birthday. Let's not make a scene. A scene? Vivian laughed. A single, humorless sound. Maribel, your husband sold my sister's most precious possession without her knowledge and used the money for a car. If anyone's making a scene, it's the man who just stood in the driveway taking credit for his mother's stolen property. The room went silent. 35 pairs of eyes moved between Vivian and my parents like spectators at a match that had suddenly turned violent. Dad's composure cracked. Just slightly, just a hairline fracture across his confident mask. This is a family matter. It doesn't need to be discussed in public. You made it public. Vivian's voice was ice. You stood in that driveway and told 35 people that your mother chose to sell her piano. You lied to every person in this room, so don't tell me this is private. Then Dad turned slowly toward me, and I watched his expression transform. Confusion to suspicion to rage, like watching weather change on a mountaintop. You did this. You told Vivian. You poisoned them against us. I stood up. My legs were trembling, but my voice was steady. Steadier than I expected. Steadier than I'd ever been. I told Grandma the truth. She deserved that much. You jealous, ungrateful, Mom started. I didn't sell Grandma's piano without permission. My voice cut through hers. I didn't spend $97,000 on myself. I didn't lie to a room full of people about where the money came from. I took a step forward, and I'm not the one who said, at least she's useful for something, when I agreed to visit Grandma every single day while the rest of you couldn't be bothered to make a single phone call. Gasps moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Aunt Vivian's hand found mine and held it tight. I spent 28 years being invisible in this family. I accepted it because I thought that's what love required. That if I was quiet enough, small enough, useful enough, maybe one day I'd earn a place at the table. I looked at my father, my mother, my sister. But Grandma taught me that loving yourself means standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. So I'm done apologizing. I'm done staying silent. And I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The doorbell rang again. This time, someone opened it, Theodore Whitmore stepped into the house with a leather briefcase and the calm authority of a man who had done this kind of thing before and understood the gravity of every second. I apologize for the interruption. My name is Theodore Whitmore. I'm the estate attorney for Doreen Lewis, and I was also a colleague of the late Richard Lewis at Palmer & Associates. He nodded to a few older guests who clearly recognized either the name or the firm. Mrs. Lewis asked me to deliver some documents to her son today. She chose this occasion specifically. Dad went white. My mother has an estate attorney? Since when? Since 5 years ago, Mr. Lewis. I also worked closely with your father before his passing. You'd know this if you'd ever asked. He opened his briefcase and placed 2 sealed envelopes on the dining table, right next to the untouched birthday cake with its 60 unlit candles. These are for you and your wife, Mrs. Lewis asked that you open them at your earliest convenience. But Dad, and this was so perfectly, tragically him, grabbed the first envelope and tore it open right there. Because he was confident. Because he couldn't imagine a world where his mother had outmaneuvered him. Because in his mind, he was always the smartest person in the room. His hands trembled as he read. What is it? Mom snatched the papers from him. And then, because shock strips away every social instinct, because panic doesn't care about audience, she read aloud. Property deed, Doreen Catherine Lewis. Never transferred. Tenants at will. Her voice climbed with each phrase, cracking and splintering. What does this? A guest near the window whispered to his wife. The house isn't theirs? Mom kept reading, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Regarding the 1892 Steinway grand piano, sold without the consent of the legal owner, conversion of property, civil and criminal liability. Stop. Dad grabbed the papers back, but it was too late. The words had already escaped into the room like birds released from a cage. Impossible to recapture. Impossible to unhear. 35 people now knew that the house they were standing in didn't belong to the man who'd welcomed them at the door, that the car in the driveway was purchased with stolen money, that the entire performance, the suits, the champagne, the Harrison deal, the perfect family portrait, was painted on a canvas that belonged to a dying woman in a hospice bed. James Harrison took one deliberate step away from my father. Just one step. But in the language of business, it was a canyon. He pulled out his phone, not to call anyone, just to hold it. The gesture of a man preparing his exit strategy. Blake Harrison let go of my sister's hand, not roughly, not dramatically. He simply released it. The way you release something you've realized isn't yours. My sister looked down at her empty hand, and I watched something shatter behind her eyes. Not anger, not indignation, recognition. The slow, devastating recognition that the ground she'd been standing on, the car, the boyfriend, the specialness, the being chosen, was made of nothing, had always been made of nothing. There's one more item, Theodore said. He held up a third envelope and turned to me. Your grandmother asked me to give this to you personally. I took it, opened it, read it in the silence of a room that had forgotten how to breathe. The trust documents, the house, the savings, everything Grandma had spent 5 years protecting. My name, Sorrel Rose Lewis, typed in clean black letters as the sole beneficiary. My father stared at me, not with anger anymore, with something worse, with the look of a man who has just realized that the person he dismissed as irrelevant was the only one who mattered all along. You can't do this, Mom whispered. But she wasn't talking to me. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was talking to the air, to the universe, to whatever force had just pulled the ground out from under her 60-year-old feet on the day she was supposed to be celebrated. I looked at my father, at my mother. At my sister with her empty hand and her shattered eyes. At the birthday cake with its unlit candles. At the ficus tree standing stupidly in the corner where 4 generations of music used to live. Then I looked at Theodore, and I said the only thing that mattered. Thank you. Tell Grandma I'll be there tonight. I walked out of the house, Grandma's house, my house now, and drove straight to the hospital. Though, the weeks that followed were not the clean, satisfying collapse that revenge fantasies promise. They were messy, slow, full of silences that hurt worse than shouting. Day 2, James Harrison called Dad. Not to end the partnership. Not yet. I need time to think, Callan. I need to verify some things. Cold. Professional. The tone of a man conducting due diligence on a liability. Day 5. Harrison's email arrived. I've decided to pause our collaboration. When the legal situation is resolved, we can revisit. Polite language for a permanent goodbye. Week 2. Blake texted my sister. My family thinks we should take some time apart. Not a breakup. Worse, a suspension. Leaving her dangling, hoping, slowly understanding that hope was the cruelest part. Week 3. The Mercedes went back to the dealer. They offered $78,000, $19,000 less than what was paid. New cars lose value the moment they leave the lot. Dreams are the same way. Week 3. Blake made it official. A text, not even a phone call. I think it's best if we go our separate ways. I wish you well. 12 words to end 8 months of choreographed romance. Week 4. The Harrison deal collapsed entirely. Over $200,000 in projected revenue, gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I drove to the hospital every evening, held Grandma's hand while she slept more and talked less, and tried to memorize the sound of her breathing. One evening she woke up, looked at me, and asked, "Are you angry with me for what I did at the party?" I thought for a long time. I'm not angry with you. I'm sad. Because if Dad hadn't sold the piano, you wouldn't have had to do any of it, and we could have just been a family. She squeezed my hand, weaker now, barely any pressure. That's what I wanted most, sweetheart. But family isn't just blood. Family is the people who choose to love you the right way. Hospice called at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the party. I knew before I answered. You don't get calls at 5:47 a.m. that carry good news. The phone buzzes differently when it's the last time. Or maybe that's just something we tell ourselves afterward, trying to find meaning in the mechanics of grief. Miss Lewis, this is Beverly. You should come now. I drove through empty Philadelphia streets in the gray light before dawn, passing shuttered storefronts and sleeping traffic lights, and I thought about time. How strange it is. How you can spend 28 years feeling like you have forever, and then suddenly, forever becomes a Tuesday morning, a 5-minute drive that feels like 5 hours. A hallway that seems to stretch longer with every step. The hospice corridor was quiet. Beverly met me at the door to Grandma's room with eyes that said everything her mouth didn't need to. She's been asking for you since 4. She's lucid. She's ready. I stepped inside. The lavender candle had been relit. Beverly must have done it, knowing it mattered. The sunrise was just beginning, painting the walls in shades of rose and gold. The Chopin was playing. Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Grandma always said could make even God cry. She was propped against her pillows, smaller than last week, smaller than seemed possible for a woman who had once filled concert halls with sound. Her cheekbones pressed against translucent skin. Her hands, those extraordinary hands that had danced across ivory keys for 50 years, lay still on the white blanket. But her eyes were open, and when she saw me, she smiled. My brave girl. I climbed into the bed beside her, careful not to disturb the IV line, and pressed my face against her shoulder the way I had when I was 5 years old, and the world was too big and she was the only thing that made it smaller. I'm scared, Grandma, of losing you, of being alone, of never having a real family again. Her hand found mine. The grip was barely there. A whisper of pressure, a memory of strength. You already know how to carry it, sweetheart. I taught you with music. A breath. Playing piano? It's about holding tension. The dissonance before resolution. That space between the wrong note and the right one, where everything aches and nothing makes sense. I nodded, tears running sideways across my cheeks and soaking into her pillow. Life is the same. You hold the tension. You sit inside the dissonance. And eventually, not when you want it to, but when it's ready, resolution comes. She was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside, a bird began to sing. Just one, alone in the pre-dawn dark. Play something for me, she whispered. In your mind. I closed my eyes. I placed my imaginary hands on imaginary keys, and I played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Every note I'd memorized at 14, every phrase she'd taught me at this kitchen table, at that piano bench, in this lifetime we'd built together between the black and white keys. I can hear it, she whispered. So beautiful. You always did play it like you meant every note. I kept playing in my mind. I played through the first movement, the second, the tender passage in the middle where the melody aches like a question that doesn't want an answer. Her grip loosened, not suddenly, gradually, like a held breath finally released. I opened my eyes. Her face was peaceful, the smallest smile still resting on her lips, as if she'd heard something beautiful in the silence between notes. Beverly checked her pulse, looked at me, shook her head gently. I held her for 20 minutes after. I hummed the nocturne into her silver hair, because it was the only language I had left, and because I still believe, that music reaches places that words cannot follow. Beverly waited. She didn't rush me. She'd been doing this for 15 years, and she understood that some goodbyes need space to breathe. When I finally sat up, she handed me an envelope. Cream-colored. Grandma's handwriting on the front. Shaky but deliberate. For Sorrel. After. Inside, a single page. Dearest Sorrel, the house, the money, their tools. Use them to build the life you deserve. But here's what I really want you to know. I forgave your father years ago. I hope someday you can too. Not for him. For you. Carrying anger is like carrying stones. Eventually, you have to put them down to play piano. I love you. Always. Postscript. In the mahogany box on the piano, the one you never got the chance to retrieve that night, there's something your great-grandfather wanted you to have. There's a hidden compartment in the bottom. Press the left corner. Don't let anyone else open it before you. I sobbed into the letter until the ink began to blur. Even in death, she was still protecting me. Still thinking 3 moves ahead. Still making sure I had everything I needed to survive in a world that had never been particularly kind. The funeral was simple, the way she wanted it. I played the nocturne on the church's modest upright piano. Not a Steinway, not a grand, just an old upright with a sticky D-sharp and a sustain pedal that needed adjusting. It didn't matter. The music carried anyway. Music always does. Aunt Vivian sat in the front row, clutching tissues, whispering along with the melody. Grandma's old friends, musicians, neighbors, women from her book club, filled several pews. Beverly came in her civilian clothes, sitting quietly in the back, a woman who'd witnessed 1,000 endings and still showed up for one more. My parents sat in the last row. Mom wore dark sunglasses that hid half her face. Dad stared straight ahead, hands clasped in his lap, jaw set. But during the nocturne, during the passage in the middle where the melody aches, I glanced back and saw something I'd never seen before. Tears on my father's face. Real tears, running freely down his cheeks. He wiped them quickly, looked around to see if anyone had noticed, and pressed his lips together hard. Even in grief, he was performing. Even while crying for his mother, he was terrified of being seen. And in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a deep, complicated sadness. Because I understood, maybe for the first time, that my father hadn't been born cruel. He'd been born afraid. Afraid of not measuring up to his brilliant mother, his successful father. And he'd spent his whole life converting that fear into control, into money, into the appearance of power. It hadn't worked. It had never worked. And now the woman he'd been trying to impress was gone. And he was sitting in the back row of her funeral, crying quietly into his hands. And he didn't even have the courage to sit in the front. My sister wasn't there. Too emotionally fragile, Mom had explained. I wondered if that was true, or if it was just easier than facing a room full of people who knew what she'd done. I delivered the eulogy. I talked about Grandma's music, her wisdom, her terrible jokes about Beethoven, her insistence that lavender could cure anything. I talked about the Saturday mornings at her piano bench, the butter cookies, the way she made every person feel like the only person in the room. I didn't mention the drama. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew. After the service, Dad started walking toward me. 3 steps. Then Mom caught his arm and pulled him away. He looked back once, and in his eyes I saw something that might have been an apology, or might have been regret, or might have been nothing at all. I'll never know. 1 week after the funeral, I went back to the house. My parents were at work. The house was empty and still, filled with the particular silence of a place that knows its owner is gone. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light. The ficus tree still stood in the living room corner, looking as ridiculous and inadequate as ever. I found the mahogany box on a bookshelf in the study. Someone had moved it there when the piano was taken, tossed it aside like it was nothing, like it was just another piece of old junk taking up space. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, ran my fingers along the polished wood, smooth, warm, alive in the way old things are alive, carrying the oil of every hand that's ever touched them. I opened the lid. Inside, Grandma's old performance photographs, just as she'd described. Black and white images of a young woman at a grand piano, fingers blurred with motion, face luminous with concentration. Programs from concerts at the Academy of Music. A pressed flower from a bouquet someone threw on stage. Then I pressed the left corner of the bottom, like her letter said. A click. The false bottom shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. The kind of secret drawer that 19th century craftsmen built into fine furniture, meant for letters and keepsakes and things too precious for ordinary hiding places. Inside the compartment, a letter, yellowed with age, written in German, and beside it, a typed English translation on modern paper. Grandma must have had it done years ago. And beneath both, a document with an ornate border and an official seal. I picked up the translation first. The letter was from Friedrich Hartmann, my great-grandfather, who later changed his name to Louis when he arrived in America. Written in 1895, addressed to his wife, Elise. My dearest Elise, the crossing was difficult, but the piano arrived safely. I wrapped it in every blanket we owned and paid 2 sailors extra to handle the crate with care. They thought I was mad. a man spending his entire savings to ship a piano across the Atlantic. But they don't understand what it is. This instrument is not furniture. It is not an investment. It is the last thing my hands built at the Steinway factory in Hamburg before I left everything behind. Every key, every hammer, every string, I helped shape them. When I play it, I hear Germany. I hear our old apartment. I hear you singing while I worked. I brought it because I need our children, and their children, and their children's children to know. No matter what this new country takes from us, no matter how hard the work or how cold the winters, our hands can create beauty. That is worth more than any fortune. That is the thing that cannot be taken. Keep it safe, Elise. Pass it down. And tell our children to pass it down after that. As long as this piano exists, our family remembers who we are. Forever yours, Friedrich I set the letter down. My hands were shaking. The document beneath it was a certificate of origin from Steinway and Sons, Hamburg, dated 1892. It identified the piano as a Model D Grand with custom interior detailing, crafted with the participation of master artisan Friedrich Hartmann. His name was right there, printed in elegant copperplate, authenticated with the company seal, and at the very bottom of the compartment, one more thing, a note in Grandma's handwriting, dated 5 years ago. Sorrel. With this certificate, the piano's value at specialized auction is estimated at over $500,000. But that's not why I kept it. I kept it because your great-grandfather carried it across an ocean to remind his family that beauty is worth protecting. Your father sold it for $97,000, a fraction of its worth, because he was desperate and didn't bother to learn what he had. The choice of what to do with this information is yours. Keep the certificate. Pursue the piano's recovery. Or let it go. But whatever you choose, make sure it's your choice. Not your father's, not your mother's, not anyone's, but yours. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding the letter from a man I'd never met who'd crossed an ocean with a piano and a prayer. A man who built something beautiful with his hands and trusted his family to protect it. And his great-grandson had sold it for a car. I didn't cry out of anger. I cried out of tenderness. For Friedrich, who believed in us. For Grandma, who spent her life honoring that belief. For the piano itself, which had survived an Atlantic crossing and 2 world wars and a century of American life, only to be sold in a week by a man who never once asked what it was worth. The months that followed were about building. Not rebuilding. I'd never had the thing I was creating, so there was nothing to rebuild. I was starting from nothing, which turned out to be the most honest foundation there is. Theodore helped me recover what could be recovered. Klein's Antique Instruments had sold the Steinway to a private collector in New York for $310,000. More than triple what they'd paid my father. With the provenance documents and the original Steinway certificate, Theodore negotiated a settlement. $185,000, covering the original sale price plus damages. The collector kept the piano but signed an agreement giving me first right of purchase if he ever decided to sell. Maybe someday I'd bring it home. Maybe not. But knowing it was out there, Friedrich's piano still making music somewhere, was enough for now. 5 months after the funeral, my parents moved out. A small apartment in northeast Philly. Dad's business downsized to a 1-room office. Mom joined a different social club. Smaller, quieter, further from Chestnut Hill. We didn't speak. Not from anger. Just distance. The kind of distance that forms when people can't find the words for what they've done, and the person they've done it to has stopped waiting to hear them. I moved into Grandma's house. My house now. And the first thing I did was buy a piano. Not a Steinway, but a Yamaha C3X Grand. Beautiful, warm-toned, mine. I placed it in the exact spot where the Steinway had stood for 30 years. And when I played the first note, I swear the room exhaled, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for music to come home. I used part of the inheritance to start what mattered most, the Sorrel Lewis Music Scholarship Program. Free piano lessons for kids who couldn't afford them. 10 students every Saturday morning, filling the living room with wrong notes and laughter, and the beautiful, chaotic sound of people learning to believe in their own hands. Emma was my first private student still. She'd finally mastered For Elise and was working on Debussy now, her serious eyes lighting up when she hit a passage just right. A year after Grandma's death, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hey, it's me. My sister. Her voice sounded different, smaller, stripped of the confidence that had always been her armor, or maybe her costume. I'm in therapy now, group sessions for codependency and self-worth issues. A pause. My therapist says I used you as a mirror to avoid looking at myself, that I put you down so I wouldn't have to face what I was. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be different. I looked at Grandma's photograph on the piano, her concert portrait. Luminous. Alive. Carrying anger is like carrying stones. That's good. I'm glad you're getting help. Could we maybe get coffee sometime? In a few months when I'm further along? Every instinct told me to say no, to protect myself, to keep the walls high and the door locked. But Grandma's letter echoed. I forgave your father years ago. Maybe. Text me when you're ready. 6 months later, we met at a cafe in Center City. She looked different. No makeup, hair in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain sweater. She looked for the first time in her life like someone who wasn't trying to be anyone other than who she was. Thanks for coming, she said nervously. I almost didn't. I was cruel to you our entire lives. I mocked your career, your apartment, your clothes. At that party, I stood next to a car bought with Grandma's stolen piano and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching you hurt. She closed her eyes. What kind of person does that? Someone who was taught that's what love looks like, I said quietly. She looked up, surprised. Mom and Dad loved you by giving you things. They loved me by not seeing me at all. We both got damaged, just differently. We talked for an hour, about therapy, about my scholarship program, about our parents, who we saw separately, rarely, in stiff conversations about weather and current events. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. And honest, I was learning, was worth more than comfortable. When we left, she hugged me, quick and awkward, like someone relearning a language they'd forgotten. Thank you. Some bridges take years to rebuild, but we'd laid the first plank. So, 3 years after Grandma died, I sat at the piano on a Saturday evening in October, the house finally quiet after a long day. 30 students now. The living room filled every Saturday with children from across Philadelphia, kids from Kensington and North Philly and West Philly, kids whose parents worked double shifts, kids who'd never touched a piano before walking through my door. Their laughter echoed through the house the way Grandma's music once had. Different in form, identical in spirit. Emma was in high school, composing her own pieces. Sophie, a shy girl from Fishtown, was preparing for her first recital. I'd published a small book of teaching methods. Nothing fancy, but it helped other teachers, and that was enough. My sister came to Sunday dinner once a month. We weren't close the way sisters are in movies. We didn't share secrets or finish each other's sentences. But we were honest. She'd gotten engaged to Aaron, a social worker she'd met through her therapy group. He was kind, quiet, the opposite of everything she'd been raised to want. She seemed, for the first time, genuinely happy. Mom and Dad had dinner with me twice a year. Stiff, polite, careful conversations about nothing that mattered. They never apologized. Aunt Vivian told me once, some people can't say sorry because it would mean admitting who they've been. That's their burden, sweetheart, not yours. She was right. The evening light came through the windows at a low angle, turning the room amber and gold, the exact light Grandma used to watch from her hospital bed. I placed my hands on the keys. I played the nocturne. Every note resonated through the house. Through the walls Friedrich's savings had filled. Through the rooms Grandma's love had shaped. Through the space where a stolen Steinway once stood and a chosen Yamaha now lived. The music wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was mine. I did it, Grandma, I whispered. I'm okay. More than okay. Her photograph caught the fading light. Doreen at 56, her final concert. Fingers poised above the keys. Her face incandescent with the joy of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. I didn't have that piano anymore, but I had something no one could sell, no one could steal, no one could load onto a truck and drive away. I had her legacy, the courage to exist without apologizing, the strength to love without shrinking, the wisdom to put down stones so my hands were free to play. Outside, evening settled over Chestnut Hill. Children's voices drifted in from a neighbor's yard. Inside, music filled the spaces that grief had left behind. I was alone in the house, but I had never been less lonely. This was the inheritance Grandma really left me. Not the property, not the money, not even the piano, but permission to finally, beautifully, completely be myself. And that was worth more than any piano in the world. Maarikin. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. It means the world to me that you gave your time to Sorrel and Grandma Doreen. If this story touched your heart, even a little, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. And leave a comment telling me, what would you have done if you were Sorrel? Would you have told Grandma the truth? I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. And take care of the people who truly see you.